Well, welcome. My name is Brittany Cohill. I'm the Executive Director here at Mandarin Museum and Historical Society, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our March 3rd Thursday lecture featuring Larry Figart, and he's an urban forester with the Duval County Extension Office, and he does a lot of work with the City of Jacksonville regarding trees and urban forestry, and I think a lot of us regard him as the expert, and I think rightly so. And so I'm really looking forward to this talk this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Larry Figart, urban forester with Duval County Extension Office. And he is just so wonderful. He was out here with a big team of master gardeners not too long ago, evaluating our trees and clearing out a lot of things. And, so he is a wealth of knowledge, but he also jumps in and gets his hands dirty. And so we really appreciate him, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Larry. Thank you.
Thank you. So just short, because I want to get into this, but just short, a little bit of brief bio on me. I grew up, my parents moved here to Jacksonville in 1965. I grew up at the beach. I went to Fletcher. Went to the University of Florida, got a degree in forestry, and I came back to Duval County. I worked for the State Forestry Division for about 19 years, and then I started working for the University of Florida Extension Service about 20 years ago. So I'm kind of typecast to trees. Candace and I were talking that it was like, tree this. She said, Larry, we're talking about trees all the time. I was like, yeah, that's my life. So it's a good thing. I like talking about trees. What was I going to say? It'll come back to me in a sec. So without further ado, let's get on through this. What we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm going to need to talk quickly. I'm known for having, like I'm doing it now, for little stories. I need to cut back on them. But we're going to do a little bit of introduction about trees, a little tree trivia, a little bit of the benefits of trees, just a few, because there are hundreds. A few trees to consider planting and we'll talk about why I picked out those trees in a little bit. I don't want to give it away, but a few trees to plant, and then some practical stuff on selection and then planting of trees. So if you want to plant a tree, there are a lot of myths out there. I do another program that's called Misperceptions of Trees, and one of them is planting myths. So we'll talk about that as well. So first, a little trivia. So trees can live a long time. Researchers in the White Mountains of California have found bristlecone pines and up to 5,000 years old. Some of those species, some of those specimens. But this was really cool. And doing the research of this, they call it Pando. That's its name, is Pando. They've named it. And it's about 106 acres of aspen trees in Utah, and they're all connected. And they've been connected. They call it clonal. They've been connected for close to 9,000 to 16,000 years. So that one organism has been alive that long. So it's kind of cool. Not all those trees are 16,000 years old, but as one unit, they keep dying and growing back, but the whole clonal unit is almost 16,000 years old. That's kind of cool. However, when we get to here in urban United States, the average lifespan of a planted urban tree is 19 to 28 years. So it's not very long. And so for every 100 street trees, Tracy and I were talking about street trees today, but for every 100 street trees that get planted, only 50% or 50 of them will make it to 13 to 20 years old. So you see that a lot. They get planted and they die relatively quickly. The largest tree in the world is the giant sequoia. It's called that's the largest is called the General Sherman. It's about 630,000 board foot of lumber in that tree. And so I looked it up today, and that average is out to be about 100 120 average-sized homes. The largest live oak in Florida, or excuse me, I shouldn't say the largest. The state champion live oak in Florida is called the Ceylon oak. It's in Lake Crosse near Alachua. It's 79 foot tall with a circumference of 28 feet and a crown spread, a large crown spread. And you might notice over here, even with it lost a big portion of that crown, and it's still, even with losing that portion, it's still the state champion. So I've got it on your little sheets, but if you need to, a QR code, if you want to find out what the state champions are, that's a registry of state champion trees that the State Forestry Division has. So we have the famous, and I don't want to give it too much away, but the bald cypress was called the Senator. It was a giant, well-known bald cypress tree near Sanford. However, in 2012, a fire burned it down, and what caused that fire is a young lady had kind of gone inside the tree because the wind was blowing her methamphetamine pipe out. So she got in there to light, and within 20 minutes, 40 minutes, the tree was like that. So those are all individual trees. So now let's kind of talk about the things, the benefits of trees, the things trees provide us. They're pretty. This treaty oak is definitely a very pretty tree. They provide us with oxygen. So this is kind of like my thing when I talk to school kids. We talk about what trees provide. The first thing they say is air. Well, I have to correct them and say, no, it's oxygen. But it's a byproduct of the food making process that plants have. So if you didn't know, we were doing a science lesson. There's the balanced equation for photosynthesis. So the byproducts of carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight is sugar and oxygen. So we get that oxygen as the byproduct of the process of photosynthesis. So a lot of times it's another beef that I have, and all the way back to when, I guess it was not Yul Brynner, who was it? I forget, I'm getting old. No, he sold plant fertilizer, and he would call it plant food, feed your plants. I said, no, plants don't, we don't feed plants, they make their own food. So this is the process of plants. No, it was Bridges, Lloyd Bridges. So anyway, trees provide us with lumber products, with wood products for our homes, but those were the easy ones. So one of the things, this is what I forgot to say earlier, but I work for the University of Florida Extension Office, and some people say, Larry, what does extension mean? And what we do is we take the research of the University of Florida and we extend that out to the community. So that's what I'm going to do here in the next couple of slides. These are all facts or benefits of trees that have been discovered through research. And at the last page of the handout, it's all those sources of where that research comes from. So trees add value to our homes. If you have a healthy tree in front of an urban house, it increases the sales value of about $7,000. Trees help us save energy. A large shade tree cools an equivalent of 10 room-sized air conditioners running 20 hours a day. So that's not even just the shade as it shades your house. That's if you stand, sit, picnic underneath a shade tree, it feels cooler, and that's why. Actually, what's happening is those leaves are releasing water, transpiring, and so that's cooling the air underneath the tree. So trees save us energy again. That trees planted on the southwest corner of our homes reduces our electric bill. The reason that is the southwest exposure is the hottest exposure that we have. We'll talk more later. So if you're in business, trees mean better business. Dr. Kathleen Wolf with the U.S. Forest Service found out that in tree-lined commercial districts, people frequently frequented those areas more often, longer shopping trips because you're not worn out from walking in the sun. They spend more money for parking, so if you're the municipality and you want to get parking revenue, and then also shoppers spent 12% more for goods in shopping districts that were lined in trees. So trees store carbon. So that term is called carbon sequestration. So all that process, remember I said they take in carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen? Well, the difference between carbon dioxide and oxygen is the carbon, and that part sticks with the tree. That stays in the tree. And so generally, a 12-inch diameter maple stores about 278 pounds of carbon. For a sycamore, and the sycamore happens to be one of the largest carbon sequesters out there because of its large leaf. And so that same 12-inch sycamore stores about 329 pounds of carbon. So trees are important to air quality. They filter, all this carbon dioxide being absorbed in and oxygen being released, that all happens through these tiny holes in the leaves. And so while that's taking place, the trees filter pollutants out of the air. So dust, ash, smoke, and then we talked about it, they release oxygen through photosynthesis. And then also lowering temperatures. We all talked about how much cooler. I think it would be cooler tonight anyway, but imagine if we were in July, how much hotter it would be if we didn't have all these trees around us right now. But what that does is it reduces the amount of work our power plants need to run, and so it reduces the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and reduces the amount of ozone in the atmosphere. So again, trees reduce the energy use and therefore less pollutants in power plants. So you may want to know, what does my tree do? So again, a couple of years ago, I became a fan of QR codes, if you want to go there. But it's a National Tree Benefit Calculator. So with that, you start out putting your zip code and then the kind of tree it is and how big it is. And what you end up with, this is my swamp chestnut oak in my front yard, but you end up with a listing of the value that tree has. So my swamp chestnut oak this year provided $35 of ecosystem services. And then since it's been alive, where is it? I messed up. But, since to date, carbon dioxide, $77 worth of carbon dioxide, stored 910 pounds of carbon, and which is the equivalent of almost 3,500 pounds of carbon dioxide. So we can get that, all sorts of other things. Let's see. Storm water mitigation, $2 a year. Air pollution removal, $5 a year. Energy savings, $17 a year. So if you ever wanted to figure out what your tree was worth in ecosystem benefits, you can go to that website. So trees are good for our health. So tree-filled neighborhoods have lower levels of domestic violence, are safer and more sociable. Tree-filled landscapes reduce stress. See, y'all that get to see me, I get to look out there, and my stress is reduced just by looking outside. They decrease, this is one of the older studies that have been around for a long time, but if patients in hospitals are able to view nature and view trees, they need less medication, shorter hospital stays, and quicker recovery. So also, this is one I thought it was interesting if you've got students, or one of the things I think about when we look at our school grounds, they become tree-less and void of trees, but streetscapes or views with trees improve the performance of attentional tests, even without the mention of trees, without the awareness of trees. So they were more attentive in school when they had views of trees. Also, participants who had raised awareness of street trees performed best and rated the streetscapes, being able to see trees, as being more restorative. So, enough a little bit about the benefits of trees. What makes a good, and I know this, you're looking at this and saying, Larry, we have hardly any of these trees. It's the best graphic. But when we go to select what trees we want to plant, what trees we want to have in our urban canopy, tree diversity is important. We could probably, maybe two hands, but at least generally one hand, we could probably list on one hand the kinds of trees we see planted in commercial parking lots. True? But what we really need is greater diversity. And so what researchers have kind of determined is that the diversity needs to be less than 30% of the trees planted in an urban forestry program need to be from the same family. Less than 20% from the same genus. So the family might be the maple family, the oak family, the elm family, the magnolia family, but then less than 20% from a single species. We don't see that. We see, like I said, 5, all different basically 5 different species, or genuses. We see 5 different species, so less than 10% from a single species for good diversity. And so why? Why do we worry about diversity? And so one of them is so history doesn't repeat itself. I don't know if, maybe you got to be a little older like me, but the Northeast and the Midwest relied on elms for a lot of their street trees, primarily. But a disease called Dutch elm disease really went rampant and killed those trees without any resistance. So again, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So also, and so you might say, well, the other thing that's happening a lot, and I don't know what we can do about it because it does have some benefits, but when we plant, even oak trees that get planted are cultivars. So what they are is cultivated varieties. When a grower finds something that he or she thinks is sellable, they will take cuttings from that tree and grow them and name them. So one of the famous live oak ones is High Rise, for instance. And so when you're doing that, they're essentially clones. So when you plant a lot of cultivars of the same cultivar, if a disease comes through or an insect comes through that likes that cultivar, because there's clones, it will like all those clones in the same cultivar. So not only just species, we want to mix up cultivars as well. So then insect and disease issues. So what we've got coming through the pipe now that we worry about is I hear a lot about oak wilt. Because a lot of times people look online, they see something, they say, my tree has oak wilt. Thankfully, the red is oak wilt. We don't have any in Florida, or else our live oaks would be, in danger. But it's something to think about. Should we keep on planting live oak after live oak after live oak after live oak when oak wilt is so close? The other one, Spheropsis on hollies. We see that a lot. Even now, Spheropsis isn't an introduced disease. It's been around forever. But when we overuse one species, we see a lot of hollies with this dieback, and that's all from a disease called Spheropsis. So then the final one is emerald ash borer. So we don't have a lot of ash trees urban planting wise, but they do in other parts of the country. And this was an introduced insect that has started in the Midwest around the Great Lakes, and it's as far south as DeKalb County, Georgia. So emerald ash borer isn't far away either. So that's kind of my argument for diversity. And so before we get into some of these, and so that was why I'm picking some of the species that I'm picking, is because you might not have heard of them. But space for trees. When we think about planting trees or selecting trees, we want to make sure, in this funny our discussion on space for trees, we want to make sure that we're giving the trees enough space. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this graph, but because I've got a better way in a second. But basically, we'll just kind of go right down the middle. If the mature crown spread is around 32 feet, if it's a 32 foot from tip to tip, then you kind of come over here and basically 500, you want to give that tree 500 square feet. And there's a little asterisk right here, and that assumes an adequate soil space of 2 feet. So that assumes a decent soil volume. But again, extension agent, I take the research, I make it easy. And so basically smaller trees need at least 10 square feet, or 10 feet. Yeah, 100 square feet, 10 by 10 for smaller trees. For medium-sized trees, 400 square feet, or around 20 by 20. And then larger trees need at least 900 square feet of planting space. So the issue is, I find a lot of, even places that have patio homes, smaller communities, the developer or the HOA or whoever, they're planting live oak trees in these really small, tiny lots. And so I just want to consider a few, not that I'm against big trees, I'm not, I love big trees, but just, or else we'd be here forever if I went over all the trees to plant. But some smaller trees to consider. One I like, and there's going to be native and non-native. One I like is called a chase tree. If you haven't ever seen it, the pretty purple blooms throughout the summer attract all kinds of pollinators, hummingbirds, bees, wasps. I've got one in my yard. My favorite tree species is hop hornbeam. And you may say, I've never heard of that. Well, that's why I'm educating you about it. They're hard to find. They're a native, but you can find them. If you ever go to the Arboretum and go on the Ravine Trail, or no, whatever creek, Jones Creek Trail in the Arboretum, there are hop hornbeams all on that trail. And what makes it cool as a wildlife food is these little nutlets that it forms. And so birds and squirrels and everything like to eat. And they're kind of small. Ironwood, you also hear it called blue beech or musclewood. And so you can't see it on the trunk, but they have all these at the Arboretum as well. In the same place with the hop hornbeams, is it looks like sinewed muscles, like somebody's really flexing their muscle. The bark is just thin and it looks like ripped. You know, it's like if these trees were on steroids. Okay, Chinese fringe tree. And I was just recently, I'll tell you where this is. This tree, you can't see, but there's all kinds of white blooms. It's at the Mandarin Garden Club. So just right down the road if you want to see what this looks like. But then also, this is out of our office. This is the native fringe tree. So they also call it grandfather baked graybeard or Grancy graybeard. And what was cool, I was driving, but just up or down, down Mandarin Road, somebody's got one on that side of the road that you can see over the fence. Beautiful tree. They're blooming now. So the city has planted a lot of fringe trees, so they're in bloom now. I say this, some people say, oh, crepe myrtle, bad tree. If you let them grow to a tree, they can be a decent tree. But I put Natchez on there, not because I'm saying only Natchez. It's my reminder that crepe myrtles grow everything from 2 foot tall to 80 foot tall, 40 foot tall. And so there are 1,200 varieties of crepe myrtle. match the tree to the space that you have to grow it in. So you can choose. So you don't have to hat rack it.
You can cut them, right?
No. Well, yeah, you can, but should you? No. We'll talk if you need to talk. So this is another one at the Mandarin Garden Club that's red buckeye. This is the only one, I have one in my yard. It's not this big yet, but it's the only one that I see that's large enough to have flowers. But right now it's in bloom with those red flowers. The thing about red buckeye is in our heat, it needs to be, it won't do as well out in the open sun. It needs to be shaded in the afternoon, or else it'll lose its leaves. Dahoon holly, another native. We hear about American holly, we hear about East Palatka holly, we hear about Yopon holly. Dahoon holly is another holly native. Hollies are male and female, so if you go to a native nursery and you want one with berries, make sure you see berries, because they may not know if it's male or female when you purchase it. Chickasaw plum, we have one. This is just, I think could be me waiting on my wife at the shopping center, but it's just a nice small tree. Right now it's in bloom. They're in bloom with pretty blossoms. Red bottlebrush. Nothing attracts hummingbirds more than red bottlebrush. So special case, and it's going to say special case for natives, especially oaks. I would like to, other than I'm quoting Doug Talame, who says oaks, so I got to include oaks, but I would love to say special case of natives. This is where over the years I have changed my tune a little bit. I used to be whatever grows, grows. Any tree is better than no tree. Yes, that's true, but a native tree is better than any tree. And it's because it's the food chain. Native species have native insects which native birds love to feed on. Native trees have native food which birds love to feed on, and other things need to feed on. So these insects are the foundation that support birds and other wildlife. And for instance, for one generation of chicks, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to feed those chicks. So you want native trees that have native caterpillars to feed the native birds. So just since I mentioned oaks, you might not realize how many oak species we have out here. Bluff oak, that's kind of a sandhill species. Live oak we're very familiar with. Post oak, one of the ways to tell is, to me, it looks like a ghost. So if you see, it kind of looks like a hood or the sheet and then arms out here like this, so it looks like a ghost. So post ghost. You see these out Durban Peninsula all over the place. Swamp chestnut oak is the one that I have in my front yard. I absolutely love it. Laurel oak, Shumard oak, water oak, and turkey oak. What I did is oaks come in two groups. White oak group, not white oaks, but white oak group and red oak group. The white oak groups are the longer lived, typically less disease prone out of those. Red oaks are kind of the shorter lived, a little bit more disease prone. One way to remember it, white oaks, and the whole key to this is they have these structures that resist the movement of decay throughout the tree. It's the same thing, the same structures that make white oak wine barrels not leak. So if you think about white oaks, oak barrels not leaking, you can think white oak. So natives and Florida friendly, I gotta talk a little bit about Florida friendly. It's a program, University of Florida, and I think, is it DEP as well, Candace? Help with Florida friendly, or is it just?
It's a collaboration.
Yeah, between university and DEP. And so, we have this thing with our master gardeners and our Florida-friendly program assistant. Well, they will come out and survey your yard, and you can get, if you've got enough of the Florida-friendly practices, you can get Florida-friendly yard status. And so this one is gold level. And so for the natural award, 75% of the species, not 75% of the plants, but if you added up all your species, 75% of the species need to be native. For the silver recognition, 25% of the species need to be native. And for the gold recognition, 40% of the species need to be native. So here's the QR code for the Florida-friendly yard recognition program in Duval County. Also, I have the program assistant is Stephanie Means. This is her email address if you want more information on getting your yard recognized. So, last bit, we're on the home stretch, the little bit of technical information. Proper planting. If you don't remember anything about planting except plant it high and it won't die, you're set. So kind of think of it like the big three. I think a leaves of three, let it be. Red on yellow, that's for poison ivy. Red on yellow, kill a fella, that's for coral snakes. And then plant it high and it won't die for planting trees. Basically, what we were told is that plant it at the same level it was growing in the nursery. So what happens is in that container, in that pot, the tree is not growing in soil. It's growing in peat, pine bark, all kinds of organic stuff. And over time, it rots. And so as it rots, the tree settles. And so it ends up being too low. So the other half of plant it high and it won't die, plant it low and it won't grow. So the worst thing you can do is plant a tree too low. So plant it a little high. And so we're going to go through the steps. Pull the tree out gently. If there are any circling roots, cut them. You might say, we used to say years ago, this is the other myth I'll get into, but like north, south, east, west, cut slices. We don't do that anymore. We don't recommend doing that anymore because those roots will continue to go round and round. This was a 200-gallon container. This is a apartment complex, and the folks that asked me to come out and look, they said the trees keep falling down. And so this rarely happens. I said, can we do something to see the root system? They said, sure. I was like, whoa. So they got the front end loader and we picked it up, and that tree had been in the ground 2 years. Do you see any roots going out? They're all just circling around what the container was. So here's a tree before planting. This is a decent root ball. But if we don't do anything to it, this is what it looks like after a while without any treatment. So, basically I said, do you notice where the roots aren't out into the soil where you want it to be? So this is cool. I don't want to make him too much of a celebrity and have people stalking his house, but Dr. Ed Gilman was the guru when I was all throughout my career with the University of Florida, the tree guy. He wrote all these, he came up with everything I've said today was from Ed Gilman. And so one of the things he talks about is root shaving anyway, my point was he lives in Mandarin. So root shaving instead of root slicing. And so his technique uses a sharp shovel. That's where I kind of deviate. I hardly ever have a sharp shovel. So basically, let's see, I got to put something down for a second. Make sure, I'm going to put it right here. So there we go. So basically, in the container, those roots hit the edge of the container and then they start circling. So if we can go and shave them or slice them where they curve, then after you do that, then those roots go out into the soil we want them to go out in. So root shaving. And so he actually does it once he plants it. Then he takes the sharp shovel and shaves the outside of the root ball. Me personally, I have an old pruning saw. I find this easier to me because I don't have a sharp shovel. But to use an old pruning saw and just about 1/4 of an inch from the outside of the container, I'll just cut all those roots. And so instead of looking like this, it'll look like that.
So you do it before you take it out of the container?
Yes, sir. So this is just an example. I'll go ahead and say it's the Target over by the avenues. Or it's actually not it's where Academy Sports is but I went by and looked, and you could see this tree is like this. Well, it had been in the ground for years, and I went, and this is the test to see whether it's established or not, is if you take that tree and it's been in the ground a couple of years and you try to move it, if the root ball does this, then it's not established. So I did that to that tree, even though it was all staked up. And it's still, you saw the root ball just come like that. So evidently it had blown over, and then they staked it up. It's still staked up, and that's been about 3 years since I took this picture. And so you can see it won't make it unless it's staked up. So find the topmost root, and you might say, well, that's just the top of the container. In this container, all that dark soil was taken out of the container before they found that topmost root. And where that's at is called the root flare. And so again, back to wine analogy, if you think of the root flare as the base of the wine glass, where it goes like that. That's the root flare. So you want to find that. And so that's the top root at the root flare. And you want that at or slightly above, preferably above the soil surface. So what's that automatically? That's too deep, right? Right. So that's that. And you can see it's about, if you can't see it, but it's about 5 inches too deep. So if that's the case, you pull it out, you put soil until you get it roughly 10% of that root ball out of the ground. So then here's the other thing that I see all the time. Nothing goes on top of that root ball. So you can see that's just like it was in the container. The reason is, we'll get into it, the most important fertilizer that you can apply is H2O. And if there's stuff on top of the root ball, that water does not get to the root ball. So leave it, not even mulch at planting. Don't do anything on top of that at planting. So that's not good. So you can, however you want to get the water, to get the soil to naturally settle. One of the things that suppresses roots is compacted soil. So this is what I see all the time is people plant it, and I'm not going to make noise. So people plant it and then they stomp on it. So here's 250 pounds, probably more, of compression going into that root ball. And so just let it settle, water it, Then you also see people, they ask, or they tell you, what can I put in the hole? Nothing but what came out of the hole. And this is I love this slide, because the red is where the root ball is. And then what you want is that root ball to be way away from the reason I'm looking is the lights went out, and so we're okay. So way away from the root ball. So whenever you plant in that planting hole is no good. So if you're going to amend something, amend the whole bed. Don't amend the hole. Okay, almost done. Prune to finish the job. So remove broken and crossing branches. if needed, and so I say this if needed, if that tree, if it's in a park, if it's in a school, if it will never get pruned again, perform structural pruning. If it's in your yard and you're going to do it every 3 months, then that's okay. Ready for mulch, you notice it's still above. And so where you put, not in this is afterwards, but you put the mulch right up to here. So you might say, well, when I first was saying 10% out of the ground, you're like, that's going to look funny. But if you put the mulch up to that, you don't see that sticking up out of the ground. Okay, 3-inch layer. Improper mulching, we need some mulch because it keeps the lawn trimmers away. Okay, I have time. So I'm going to tell you this, I am going to deviate for a second. The research at the University of Florida performed by Dr. Ed Gilman, who now lives in Mandarin, was they took a whole bunch of trees, but they did 4 treatments. They planted the trees didn't do anything. I won't move, but pretend I'm moving over here. They planted the trees and just took care of all the weeds. They planted the trees and added an inch of mulch. They planted the trees, they added 3 inches of mulch. The only difference was this one, and it was not as big. So the biggest competitor for newly planted trees are weeds and grasses. So anything you can do to keep that away from the tree early on, that's important. So mulch does that. So we don't want mulch volcanoes. So we see this a lot of times, and basically a lot of times mulch is added by blowing it in, and so nobody ever spreads it out. But you don't want this because it holds moisture up to the trunk. It also, when we talk about circling roots in the pot, if this is all composty, what those roots will do is they'll come up out of the soil and start circling up here if you leave them. So no mulch volcanoes. Berm or no berm, doesn't matter. Some people say, well, let's make a berm so it holds water. That's good. But just make sure that you pull that soil away when it's time, or else it makes the tree too deep. Okay, staking methods. These are traditional. This is fine. I have a tree in my yard that's staked up like this, so it still moves when the wind blows. However, what you got to do is you got to take them off eventually. So this is an alternative staking method. I kind of call it tree staples, but it's putting lumber either through the root ball or just outside the root ball. Here's a better picture. And then putting cross members, and you don't have to think about, if you don't use pressure treated wood, you never have to remove it. It rots away. And so you're anchoring the root ball, not keeping the tree to where it doesn't move. Okay, this is hard to read. Fertilization with water. Our take-home message, our sprinklers don't cut it. They don't give us enough. They need dedicated bubblers or hoses or something. And so I've got it highlighted. At each irrigation, 2 to 3 gallons per inch of caliper. So for a typical 2-inch tree, that would be 4 to 6 gallons at every watering. And so if you, over here for vigor, 2 to 4 inch caliper, that's every day. So that's 4 to 6 gallons every day for a month. 4 to 6 gallons every other day for 3 months. And then 4 to 6 gallons every week till it's established. So that's proper watering. Any questions? That's all I have for now. That was a lot, right? I know. So as I promised, it's at the end. These were all those all that research, that's what those are, if you want to find the papers. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have crepe myrtles in our yard, and we've never trimmed them. They're tall, they might be the 40-foot tall crepe myrtle. I'm very jealous of the people that hack their crepe myrtles off and out without giving a second thought, and then they bloom and they're so beautiful, and my crepe myrtle looks like old and haggard. How can I get my large crepe myrtle to bloom like that? Will it never do that?
So I'm thinking in my head, unfiltered thinking. So how old are they?
They could be 40 plus years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's probably why they aren't blooming. I'll give you two methods. One is called, you can appropriately reduce the height of a tree using a kind of cut that's called a reduction cut. And I'm going to have to, so a reduction cut is, like say the tree is like this is the top and you got another branch coming off. A reduction cut prunes the top at another branch. So you wouldn't do this, you would do that, and then you still have this branch. So you can start doing reduction cuts all the way out here. And that might introduce some growth. The other thing, there is no research with this. This was just me. You might not want to do it. But at our office, I almost don't record this. So at our office, we have crepe myrtles that were planted in 1972 with the office. They were dying back. They were dying more than they were growing. So I cut them at the ground, and then as they sprouted back up, I managed and cut them back to 3. And now they're this tall, blooming, all that kind of stuff. So that's an old forestry kind of thing that's called coppicing. So I just kind of borrowed that, but there's no research. So what I would recommend is just doing reduction cuts.
Larry, when you talk about this, Gabrielle,
Yes.
when you do what you just said at the old Winn-Dixie Shopping Center on San Jose, for those of us who live around here, they had the most amazing crepe myrtles. And of course, they came through because you have to do that kind of massive cutting at a certain time of year because they did it right before winter. And it was like totally annihilated these amazing, crepe myrtles they had in that shopping center. But another question. Brittany, I'll help you. Why is it that, and of course this has more to do with what the city is planting, it drives me crazy because, they replanted a bunch of stuff on San Jose Boulevard and the islands, and most of them were treed crepe myrtles. But they also keep insisting on using like treed ligustrums, which have this fungus that you can't get rid of unless you spray them all the time. With the black spots and stuff. I mean, I have really old ligustrum bushes, and they're slowly dying, and so I'm replanting them with viburnum, like standard type viburnum. But why does the city use something like that everyone knows has a disease and isn't going to do well, and they haven't done well? They're, by that new apartment complex called something Rise. But anyway, that's a FOT question, I guess, but.
So I'll answer it this way. And I have a different addition to your, so I was able to think. So I'll answer it this way, and it's going to be snarky, but when I was I'm still in church, but I was chair of the staff parish that did the hiring and firing. So all the time people would come to me and say, Larry, I want to fire the choir director, or Larry. And so I learned early on, I'm not the triangulator. So what I would say is go to whoever's managing those trees. And so I can't speak for them. I don't know what, if it were me, I wouldn't. And that, diversity is good. Back to your question, the other appropriate way is to prune nothing bigger than, you can chop it back, but it's called pencil pruning, and it's just nothing bigger than that all the way around.
Isn't it true you're not supposed to cut
You can prune them anytime. They bloom on new wood. So whatever grows in the spring is what the blooms will be on. So the practice, and so I got a couple of things. Research again from the university is all that new sprouting that occurs when you hat rack them. So it's thin, it's wispy, all the blooms are at the same level, and then when it rains, they droop down. It's because there's no structure to it. But the research showed that there are the same, unless they're old, the same amount of blooms. They're just well dispersed throughout the tree if you leave them growing like a tree. They're there. They're just not here. They're here.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a Myrtle,
Okay.
and we're in the house 2 years now, and it has already been murdered. Is there any way, and I don't like that, is there any way?
Absolutely.
Can I just leave it?
So, I don't like that term either because it makes it think if you say, oh, don't create murder on them, well, they're still alive, like that they're going to die. So my term is, I tried to come up, and so this is my focus group right here, crepe hate. So the key is for about 2 or 3 years, let it.
Okay.
And then pick one to be the leader. So pick one, the nice, tallest, straightest one.
Okay.
Reduce about a third, and then remove the other 2/3. So what it does is it starts building this structure of a single trunk instead of that, and then branches like normal.
Okay, and it'll get,
You may, depends on how,
I don't know how.
I've seen some big ones like this that are hacked, and so you see this knot with these little itty bitty, that will never look right. But if they're closer to smaller,
Not too big, it looks nice.
then it'll get to normal
Okay.
eventually. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, away from crepe myrtles. So I've got a new tree, and it's going to get great big. And I have a space where it can grow and everything, but the water lines are sort of close. But I live in a neighborhood, and obviously there are going to be water lines everywhere.
So the city water lines, they're deeper than those roots will ever go. So you don't have to worry about that.
Thank you.
You tell me when, okay?
Oh, we're good if there are more questions.
Okay.
Keep going.
I'll stay for as long as you want, but you cut me off. Yes, Chris?
Yeah, you mentioned an arboretum earlier.
Mhm.
Where is that?
So the Jacksonville Arboretum and Gardens, I think is what they call themselves. But they're out off of Monument Road, just like a quarter of a mile, maybe less. You go 295, or excuse me, Eastern Beltway North, 295.
Google it.
Yeah, well, I'm just used to saying 295. 295 at Monument, you go east about a quarter of a mile, it's on your left-hand side.
It's probably 25 minutes, 30 minutes.
The street is called Milco, Millcoe. Somebody over here. Yes.
So we have a ruby red grapefruit tree that we grew from a seed. It's about 12 years old. You actually came out to our yard and helped us with our trees at one point, and it hadn't borne fruit for 10 years. It's only borne fruit now 2 years. And you told us it may never because it could have been grafted. And
It wasn't grafted.
Right.
Okay.
So after 10 years of me fertilizing it on my hands and knees, and for the most glorious batch of
Over
fruit.
200.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
2 years.
Good for you.
But, so 2 questions. Is there anything we can do to prevent it from citrus greening? And then the other thing is, it's big and branches are what, 18 inches off the ground. Can we prune it? And when should we prune? It's got little flowers now again for the third, this will be the third season.
So we need another session on citrus. But,
Congratulations, by the way.
yeah, very good.
Thank you, it's incredible.
I think I can answer this quickly.
Not us.
So is there anything you can do? No. But
Can't do anything to prevent.
there is, at this time, there is no treatment prevention, but there is a management of greening. And so what that is what greening does is it kind of clogs the pipes, so to speak. So it looks like a nutrient deficiency, but it's just the tree, the nutrients aren't getting up there. So having nutrients available to the tree throughout the growing season is very important. So I'll throw this number, depending on how old it is. Say you're going to give 10 pounds of fertilizer normally. So in March, April, May, June, July, 2 pounds each month. So you get that same 10 pounds, but it's throughout the growing season. So that will help. The other thing is, and this is not perfected research yet, it's kind of ongoing research, but they were doing research on citrus greening, and the edge of the grove was in the forest, under an oak forest. They noticed that the wild trees, like yours, where seeds just fell, didn't have very many greening symptoms. So why? And it ends up, there's something in the oak leaves that I want to say the right word. It doesn't resist it. It helps the tree fight off greening. So the tree has it, but it still looks better. And so using oak leaf, what they'll say is either an oak leaf tea or just using oak leaves as mulch. So those two things. And as far as prune it like any other tree. The timing would be after you pick the fruit.
So it's too late now because it's set in the fruit again, or it's about.
Yeah, I mean, but give it another 2 or 3 months and,
And we could
oh
cut
wait,
off
no, that's a whole year. Yeah,
next year.
Yeah.
For the fruit. And we
Yeah.
can cut off whatever we want is to shape it.
sure. Yes. The way they do it in the groves is actually, they hedge it up like boxes. So,
Do we still have the wild oranges here?
There are some,
Well,
yeah.
actually, no, as I was walking the dog today, there are a bunch of seedlings that I think we should be staking up because it's like the wild, stuff that's just growing because there are many, there are a number of them along County Dock Road. There's a huge one next to the orchid tree that are, not propagated on stock or whatever. Because at the end of the day, most of us just love the smell of the citrus blossoms and of course the fruit because, over the years I've planted 15 trees and they're all now dead and it's very sad, but what can you say?
so just, go ahead.
One thing, the ones that have died back and sprout up, they're really sour.
Correct.
They're too hard to eat, but if you take a key lime pie recipe and substitute juice from a sour orange, it comes out great.
Okay, good. I'll stick around for as long as y'all want to ask questions, but I know,
We could be here all night.
Right.
Like, there is a fringe tree, because the city came, whenever it was, months and months ago, but they planted 12 new trees in the park. And one of them, I think it's a Chinese fringe, is blooming. And it's on the path to the Webb farmhouse, where the azaleas are. Anyway, it's all white and snowy and.
Where can you get those locally?
I think.
fringe trees?
Yeah, like fringe tree.
Is that, so that's
So
a
the-
Chinese friend?
No. Well, there's native fringe and Chinese fringe. The biggest difference, the biggest difference is the Chinese fringe will leaf out and bloom at the same time versus the native fringe trees bloom and then leaf out. And the leaves will be kind of rounded in the Chinese trees and more football shaped with the native trees. So this year, evidently, I don't know why, I just heard this anecdotally, that it was a hard year for fringe trees. And so even when they gave away last weekend, they usually give away fringe trees, but they couldn't get any. So it's a shortage this year. I don't know if it was weather or what it was. Over demand? Yes, ma'am.